All right, happy Thursday to everybody, and welcome to this special edition of KETIV Virtual Academy. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Mark Palmer to discuss how simulation drives increasing value in the medical device industry. Dr. Palmer is the Senior Chief Technologist for Healthcare at Ansys, having brought his talents over from Medtronic, where he was Research Director in the Corporate Strategic Scientific Operations Group. And we're very happy to have him on the call with us here today. Just a couple housekeeping items really quickly. As usual, please feel free to send questions via the Q&A. We will do our best to get those answered at the end of the session, and if applicable, get them answered in real time. Also, all of these sessions are recorded and available for distribution on ketiv.com or on our YouTube channel. So please go ahead and feel free to share this content with peers as you see fit. So without further ado, I'll pass things over to Dr. Mark Palmer to get us started. Thanks so much, Dr. Palmer.
Thank you. So first, let me thank you by thanking KETIV for this opportunity to speak with all of you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And it's a great pleasure to be able to talk with you about how simulation drives the increasing value in the medtech industry. So I wanted to begin with this discussion around personalized medicine and technology. So why did I want to start here? And the reason is that there's this idea in medicine now that we can better understand the population effect of a technology, not by creating average patients or average subjects that we use for evaluations, but by creating a population of individual patients and then looking at the combined effect across that group of individuals. So in healthcare, the big picture is that we're trying to drive this list of healthcare objectives. Namely, we want to optimize the health of individuals. We want to be able to predict and prevent their adverse events. In the case that they need an intervention, we want to have that intervention be a planned intervention. And we want to extend the quality of life of individuals, and we want to extend life itself. So as we think about the application of technology and the modeling and simulation tools and capabilities that we bring to the healthcare setting, we want to be able to map the effect of the technology and the output from those models and simulations against these big healthcare objectives. Now, if we look at the things that are potentially going to be the inputs to the models, it's going to be these modifiable factors. So there's a lot of things surrounding an individual that are difficult or challenging to measure in the clinical setting. And there's a lot going on around that individual that is happening outside of that clinical setting. So on the left, these modifiable factors or these potential inputs to our simulation could be the diet, the exercise, the sleep, the environment that the person is in, their socioeconomic situation, and particular behaviors that the individual may have. And then when we start to look at the interaction between that individual and the care environment, now we're looking at things like prescribed medications, prescribed therapies, surgery, and implantable technologies. Now, the reason to take all of these factors into account is to be able to predict the impact of the things that we are doing, either in the care of that individual or in the treatment of that individual. We want to understand the impact of those things on that person's physiome. So can we predict the effect of a particular technology, a particular device, a particular intervention on that person's nervous system, their cardiovascular system? Can we even predict what the clinician is going to see if they look at that patient in the clinical setting in terms of their vitals and their lab results? So the ability to develop our tools using these modeling and simulation technologies and then have the predictions from our simulations forecasting the behavior of our technology into the clinical setting is going to be where we can have really increased value. Now, another key question is, have the computational methods that we're going to employ matured to the point where it should be an ethical requirement to test using these methods to evaluate safety and efficacy first before going into the patient? And on the right, I have in the upper right-hand corner, the fact that today it would absolutely be unacceptable to do this in other industries like aerospace, automotive, and defense. A lot of the work that we do to establish the safety for an occupant or the safety surrounding a human interacting with those technologies is all done in simulation. So the question is, what would it take, or are we already at that point where modeling and simulation can help us establish the safety criteria as it relates to pharmaceutical agents, as it relates to a surgical procedure, or as it relates to the technology that we're implanting in the body. So focusing still further, now we can look at the role of modeling and simulation in the process of actually developing that technology. So what we have here is work that was adapted by or conducted by the ITI Global Institute. And they were looking at the financial impact of modeling and simulation on the manufacturer. So across the bottom of this graph is the different phases of the product life cycle, starting with discovery and ideation, going into invention and prototyping. We adapted this a bit for our application. So the preclinical and clinical trials, and then regulatory approval, going into production and post-market monitoring. And these different colored lines represent the different methodologies that are used to explore the design and to bring it to market. So the curve in black is identifying the pathway that could that's typical for doing research and development using build and test methods. And the vertical axis represents the number of problems that are identified during this process. And this helps us identify where those problems are identified. And the study also looked at, based on where in the life cycle, how much does it cost to resolve each of these problems. So as you can see with the build and test method, the majority of the identified problems are occurring late. And as they occur late in the product life cycle, they're more expensive to fix or to resolve. And the cost typically increases by factors of 10 as you go from the prototyping phase into the regulatory phase, into the manufacturing and post-market phase. So the introduction of digital engineering, primarily CAD-based technologies, resulted in a significant shift to the left of when these problems are identified and when they're resolved in the product life cycle. And then simulation combined with CAD results in that purple curve that provides the most profound shift to the left in being able to identify problems a lot earlier in the product's life cycle, resolving them much more cheaply, and being able to have a much smoother run as you progress through the remainder of the product life cycle. So in bringing these concepts into the medical device industry, certainly we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but it's learning how we can take these lessons that have been learned in these other industries and apply them in the medical device or pharma arena, and use modeling and simulation to help create the value proposition behind using these digital methods to bring products to the market. So a concrete example is shown on this slide, and this slide actually comes from Medtronic, my former employer. But in this study, Medtronic demonstrated that applying in silico methods to address key questions in the clinical trial design had a profound impact on the cost and time to market. And more specifically, the ability to eliminate one question from the clinical study reduced the size of that study by 256 patients. Because this was an invasive procedure, it was the micro leadless pacemaker in this example. The estimated cost per patient in a study like this is on the high end. So these numbers were derived from an estimated patient cost of about $40,000 per patient in the study. So reducing the trial size by 256 patients was approximately $10 million in savings. And then the other factor to consider is the impact of the study design on the time to market. And here, reducing the trial size by 256 patients also reduced the amount of time it took to enroll the critical number of patients for the clinical trial. It reduced it by 2 years. So being able to execute the clinical trial in 2 years shorter time got them to market 2 years earlier. And that 2 years earlier on the market allowed them to treat 10,000 patients using this new therapy. And these patients were high-risk patients, and they would not have been candidates for the traditional standard of care therapy. So these are pretty profound numbers demonstrating the value that computer modeling and simulation can have on clinical trials by reducing them, by refining them, and by replacing them with computational models. So a further testimony to this is this quotation from the VP of Corporate Technology at Medtronic, who just recently retired. But he stated that he firmly believes in the work that Medtronic is doing with modeling and simulation, and the impact that it has on improving the quality of Medtronic's products, and that this would have been impossible using the old-fashioned build and test method for bringing products to market. And he further went on to say that without simulation, the development timelines would have been extended by years, and the cost would have increased by millions of dollars. And that cost would increase the cost of the therapy and be passed on throughout the healthcare system. So this is really a profound impact. So I'll pause there and see if we have any questions before I transition to the next part.
Anybody with questions can feel free to put them into the Q&A section. We don't have any at the current moment, but please keep them coming and we can address those as they come in.
Okay. Okay, so the next challenge I wanted to speak to is this problem of acquiring data to feed healthcare innovation. So what I've shown in this table is on the left is listed the different sources of evidence that can be used for regulatory submissions. So benchtop testing, animal testing, cadaver testing, and then testing in humans. And then across the top are the different phases of the product development lifecycle. And in the numbers in the chart are kind of representative of the volumes of data that are collected in each of these different types of evidence. And the color coding is then, do you have enough data to build a robust data model from this volume of data? So these numbers are surprisingly low when we think about what we're trying to develop and to put into the bodies of individuals. So benchtop testing, this isn't to say that it's 10 or fewer, it's to say that it's between 0 and 100. But that's roughly the scale of the benchtop tests. Animal tests, very large animal tests are on the order of 50 to 100 animals. So again, not a huge number, but now in the animal, you're able to collect data over time in that animal, so that amplifies the amount of data that can be generated. A large cadaver study, again, is on the order of or 10 or more cadavers. And then all of this data leading up through the preclinical study are used to justify that first in human or pivotal study, which tends to be less than 100 patients, usually much less than 100 patients. And then if the pivotal study goes well, then you can enter that regulatory phase where we're looking at between 100 and 1,000 patients in a clinical study for regulatory approval before we scale up for for manufacturing and production. So the themes here on this slide are that early in the product life cycle, there's a scarcity of data. There's a lack of empirical or real world data, which limits the ability to construct data-driven models or AI machine learning or deep learning models. And then after product release, there's this added compounded factor that medical device manufacturers have limited access to the data that their devices have enabled. And a high-end estimate for the amount of data that actually makes it back to the manufacturer is about 10% of the data that was collected by their device. So again, there needs to be a way to be able to augment this and to be able to provide more robust evidence in support of the technologies that we're trying to bring to individuals. So hopefully this is review for most of you, but the method that's used, or the code of federal regulations that we have to follow is listed here. And this is the definition for valid scientific evidence. And it defines 3 forms of valid scientific evidence that is used to establish the reasonable assurance of safety and efficacy of a medical device. And as mentioned on the previous slide, this comes in the form of animal testing, testing on human subjects, and then the non-clinical investigations, which include bench testing and things like modeling and simulation. So the FDA has been very active in publishing on the use of modeling and simulation for regulatory applications. I believe the running total right now is over 70 peer-reviewed publications issued by the FDA, and in particular, the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories at the FDA on applications of modeling and simulation for this. So this is a reference from 2018, I believe. Yes, 2018. Where the FDA kind of outlines the different ways that modeling can be used across the product lifecycle. So they talk about simulating the device, simulating the anatomy, simulating physiology, simulating chemistry and toxicology, and then simulating the manufacture or the 3D printing process. So this top row has to do more with the R&D process around the medical device. And then the bottom row has more to do with the application of modeling and simulation in the wild or in the clinic. So this is where modeling and simulation would be deployed inside a device or embedded in its software. This is simulation as a device where prediction from the computational model is used to aid in the clinical decision making. This is a simulation of treatment and outcomes. So what you're looking at here are survival curves, and the red alley here is a simulation of the patients that were enrolled in a clinical study, and the blue are the patients that would be expected to receive the therapy after it's been approved. So what this is really highlighting is that even the clinical study, which is considered the gold standard for data related to the safety and efficacy of a product, is not representative of reality. That those patients are carefully selected. The methods that are used to evaluate, or the clinical care those patients receive, are also specialized, and that after the product is approved, the distribution really changes in a profound way. So to really understand how the product is going to behave, both in the clinical study and then after it's been approved and released, really requires the ability to simulate beyond what's going to happen in the clinical study. And then the FDA has done a lot of work to look at how regulatory methods that rely on modeling and simulation compare to traditional methods for regulatory evaluation. So this is a study that they did on evaluating technologies to screen for breast cancer. So this was called the Victory Trial. It's a really nice study by the FDA if you want to look that up. And then the one on the far right is simulation to feed real world data and deep learning. So this is the use of synthetic data to augment the data that's used to create AI and machine learning algorithms. So another thing that the FDA has been really active with is in working with industry and academia to develop these guidance documents around the use of modeling and simulation and how to report modeling and simulation in your regulatory submissions. So this has been kind of a long road that started back in the 2012, 2013 timeframe. And then the ASME VNV40 assessing the credibility of computational modeling for medical devices was issued in 2018. So if you're not familiar with this, you can track this down through ASME. But essentially, it creates a framework for how much verification and validation needs to be performed on your model based on the risk to the patient if the model is wrong. So this takes into account things like what are the other sources of evidence that are going to be involved in the decision-making process. So it really helps put the model as part of a package of evidence to help the regulators make a decision about the safety and efficacy of the product. So all of this builds towards what we've been trying to pursue in modeling and simulation, which is how to create these validated virtual environments in the healthcare related setting that these other industries have been doing for some time. And this is driven by the idea that learning in the real world is an expensive and time consuming process. And that with a validated virtual environment, you can really unleash your domain intelligence. And this will accelerate bringing your innovative solution to the market, but it also accelerates being able to wrap that solution with a robust data ecosystem. So some of the challenges for operating or learning in the real world are it can be really challenging to make the desired measurements, especially in a biological system. In the healthcare systems, there's also the challenges of access to data, privacy, and security. There's the added appropriate concern around ethical testing, particularly in humans and in animals. But then there's also this question of how do you account for these adverse events? And especially in our designs, our whole design methodology is to make the adverse event a very low frequency event. So the idea that we'll be able to explore and capture it in the real world really introduces this idea that we're going to have to collect a lot of data in the real world. And the challenge with developing a data ecosystem to help prevent adverse events means that we need a way to build up a sufficient volume of data for that data ecosystem to be able to have a big enough sample of adverse events to learn from. So this whole virtuous design cycle, the design, the assess performance, and optimize, being able to do this with computational modeling, again, is our ideal state for healthcare. And then being able to take that further step and then build a data ecosystem to help drive or accelerate those simulations is also going to have tremendous added value. And this added value comes from the time compression or the time acceleration. So when we think about the sophisticated engineering models that we run today, they can take anywhere from minutes to hours to days to even weeks, especially if we're going to be running them on a large number of individuals, or if we're going to be exploring a large design space. But when we look at the clinical applications, now we're talking about seconds to minutes being the time window that we have to deliver a solution or to deliver an actionable prediction. So The applications listed on the right are the types of tools that we could wrap around our manufactured product. So this would be, again, that idea of the software embedded in the device running a lot faster, the ability to screen patients to identify the responders versus the non-responders to the therapy. So only those who would benefit would receive it. How to do a pre-op plan. So helping the clinician and their staff be able to plan the sizing and the approaches and the different factors that would influence a good outcome for the procedure. The intraoperative guidance, again, that more real-time precision information or precision predictions that would guide the clinician while they're executing the procedure. And then these recommender systems that help them understand how to follow a patient prior to receiving the device or follow the patient after receiving the device. And this is a big deal as the healthcare system becomes more stressed with the reduction in the number of workers. So if a particular patient can be seen once every 6 months instead of once a month, that means that that particular care provider can manage more individuals as part of their practice of medicine. And that opens up the scalability and access to care, which is a big pressure point for and a growing pressure point for healthcare systems across the world. So the bottom of this slide has a quotation from a report from Gartner that predicts that by 2030, most of the data used in AI will be artificially generated, and that you won't be able to build a high quality, high value AI model without synthetic data. So really, in healthcare, we're trying to catch up to what other industries are already doing. I think that some industries have already passed this inflection point with their ability to leverage simulation data that's used to train AI. And this is really an area of growth and focus across the modeling technologies, not just at Ansys, but across the modeling and simulation ecosystem that is focused on healthcare. So all of this is to build to address this data problem in healthcare innovation, which is to add this additional layer of computer modeling and simulation that allows you to scale each phase of your product lifecycle with additional data from simulation that's limited by your computational resources or more limited by time than it is about your ability to conduct the investigation. So being able to transition the limitations on the left to being able to amplify those data sources using modeling and simulation at each phase of the product lifecycle, being able to ask yourself, do I have the right volume of data, the right volume of simulation to address the type of question that I have right now in my product development process? So the right volume of data to address the right insights at the right time. And then this last one is the ability to scale effectively. That's been enabled by reduced order models and hybrid AI methods that further allow you to accelerate not just the time, but also to compress the cost of being able to run these simulations. So again, I'll pause there, see if we have any questions that have come in yet.
Thank you, Mark. Let's see, we have one question that just came through. How accurate are the simulation models? How generalized are the models, or is there a certain set of parameters or variables that are considered when modeling?
Excellent question. So I'll refer back to that ASME VNV40 document. So one of the concepts or principles that underlie that document is that the simulation won't be able to answer everything, and that a really good simulation is focused on answering a single question or a small set of questions really well. So the language around that in the guidance is called the context of use. So the context of use defines why the model is made and what quantity of interest or what quantities of interest it's going to generate. And that really helps you understand what you need to do on the experimental side to do the validation of that model. So yeah, so hopefully that answers that question.
Wonderful. That's all we have for now.
Okay. So this last section of the talk, before we throw it wide open for question and answer, has to do with how we take these ideas and how we use it to drive the applications that that we're trying to develop in the healthcare modeling and simulation ecosystem, and in particular, some of the ways that Ansys is trying to do that. So I wanted to start here with what Ansys is doing to accelerate the digital transformation in healthcare. And the activities that we're doing are summarized in these three blocks on the left. So the first one has to do with insights and personalization, where we want to be able to really drive the technology within the solver to account for the fact that biology is multi-physics intrinsically, and that there's a coupling that needs to happen between our understanding of physiology, which is kind of a 0D problem, with the multi-physics part of the problem, which is the spatial dimension part of the problem, and how we bring these things together to create insights. So the second challenge there is, how do you personalize it to an individual? So of course, we need to be able to streamline the ability to ingest patient-specific imaging into our modeling and simulation workflow. And then how do we do biology in the loop design optimization? So how do we design or optimize both within an individual, and how do we do design optimization across a population of individuals? So that's the insights and personalization piece. The second one has to do with the democratization of simulation. So in order to do that, we're working on techniques for doing workflow automation, and really trying to make it easy for the end user to create applications that are tailored to their requirements, that allow them to wrap the solver technology with the tools and the visualizations that are necessary for their context of use, or that really drive how to present that quantity of interest from the model in a way that their customer or that they themselves can more easily consume. So how do you take the stresses and strains, for example, from an engineering simulation and turn it into something that you can dialogue with a clinician about? And then the last part is the digital evidence for regulatory approval. So to tackle this part, the 5, 10, 20 kind of academic models that we run really are not convincing in a clinical setting. So we need to be able to scale to 100 or 1,000 of these virtual patient analyses in order to really convince the clinician, convince the regulator that the solution is able to distinguish the treatment population from the standard of care. So how do we make our analyses highly scalable? How do we do simulation-driven regulatory approvals? And how do we really create this ecosystem that allows for medical digital twins? So I'll be showing a few examples of each of these. This isn't necessarily meant to be an advertisement for Ansys Technologies, but just to kind of whet your appetite on the types of applications for modeling and simulation that have been making headway and really moving the needle in the healthcare space. So this first one speaks to this multi-physics capability in our solvers. So the problem being shown here is this electromechanical cardiac model. So the idea is being able to take something complex from clinical imaging to really smooth out and accelerate the ability to take that clinical image and push it into a physics-based modeling technology, automating some of the things that are more challenging to characterize about the patient. In this case, it is how does their electrophysiology behave, and how do we tune that to be patient-specific? How do we tune fiber orientations in their tissues to be able to develop a better tissue mechanics representation? And then how do we create these closed loop workflows? So what you're looking at the bottom of the figure here is the ability to map the output from this multi-physics cardiac model, which is coupled electromechanical and fluids, into a simulation that outputs things that the clinician is used to seeing. So this particular simulation was tuned using the EKG of the patient, and it's predicting the pressure in each of the chambers of the heart and presenting this back out in pressure versus time for each of those chambers, and then these pressure volume loops that the clinician is more used to seeing. And this Pythonic interface allows you to tailor that output to suit your particular needs. This next example is a model for respiration in the lungs. In this case, the application was trying to understand how drug is deposited in the lungs when the person uses an inhaler. And this particular company was interested in how to design the inhaler to influence the path that the particles of drug will take once they're inhaled. So one of the challenges, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, is that with an inhaler, 80 to 90% of the particles actually end up taking a different branch and ending up in the stomach rather than going down the trachea. And by cleverly designing the inhaler to account for CFD and how the drug is injected into that inhalation stream, can profoundly impact the pathway that those particles will take. This example from orthopedics is to capture that idea of how to create this closed loop workflow that we alluded to earlier, where you can do design optimization all within one kind of closed loop set of tools. So in this particular case for the spine, the technology that is being developed is this, they call it an interbody spacer that sits between these two vertebral bodies. The application is that this patient has disease in this intervertebral disc that's causing it to collapse and bulge and potentially impinge on the spinal cord that is traveling along this path here. And this interbody spacer needs to meet a number of design criteria, including not focusing the stress so much that it causes the bone to fracture, but then also being able to withstand the cyclical loading that's going to occur in the spine, just to name a few. So this workflow allows for that topology optimization. So the design of the structure of the interbody spacer, since it's not a solid block, and how to optimize that, and to create a lattice-based structure. And it actually, the workflow actually goes all the way through to doing virtual compression testing along the different ASTM standards that apply to this device, and then being able to simulate the additive manufacturing process that's used to fabricate the device. So again, this allows you to do all of this in a virtual workflow and minimizing your dependence or reliance on physical testing, doing a lot of prototyping and tweaking of your additive manufacturing process to come up with an appropriate solution. Another one that's meant to kind of pique your imagination has to do with cancer treatment. So this is a collaboration across several universities in Spain, where they are using modeling and simulation to augment the ability to treat and manage pediatric cancer. There are two in particular that are responsible for the highest morbidity and mortality in children that they wanted to address with this modeling capability. So in this particular case, the simulation is looking at the growth of the cancer and looking at how that growth is reflected in the cell and the cell makeup, the connectivity of the tissue inside that cancer, and the response of that cancer to chemotherapy and to nutrients from the bloodstream. So the figure on the right is showing the image that was created from the patient's data when they were diagnosed. There's a forecast that shows what happens if the tumor is not treated, and then the simulation provides a prediction of the response of the cancer to the therapy, and that's compared to the follow-up image that's taken at regular intervals as the patient is undergoing treatment. So this really helps the clinical team to understand whether they're dosing the patient appropriately with their chemotherapeutic agents, and to understand the trajectory and forecast the trajectory of the patient in response to the therapy. So two more quick examples. This one is a study that was conducted or led by the team in the University of Leeds. The lead investigator was Alex Franke, but the idea here was to see whether a clinical trial that was executed completely in silico would be able to reproduce a clinical trial that was performed in traditional manner. So the particular application here is for the treatment for stroke, and the stroke. The initiation of the stroke has to do with this aneurysm, which is this balloon-like feature that is not supposed to exist on this vessel. And the therapy is to fill that space with a metallic coil, and then install a stent that supports that coil and keeps it in place. And then the body remodels this sac and turns it into scar so that it will prevent the stroke from occurring. So what was really novel about this was the scale at which this group was able to do this. So they were able to automate this image processing workflow to get from the image acquisition, where you can see the tiny aneurysm balloon right here, and mesh it, do the virtual implantation of the device, run the CFD, and then present the results in a way that the reviewers are used to seeing, and extract the results from the simulation that were used to, or that were analogous to what was collected clinically. And the result of all this work was that they were able to show that the results from the simulation matched the result from the clinical study, and the regulatory review of either set of data would have been exactly the same. But then they were also able to show that they were able to test use cases or boundary conditions beyond what was performed clinically. So they could do things like induce hypertension or high blood pressure as additional boundary conditions on these patients. They could vary some of the inlet and outlet characteristics or some of the material properties in the tissue to make a more robust prediction. And the last example I want to share is just the use of modeling and simulation to help in the design of sensors. So this is an optical simulation that is looking at the behavior of an emitter and a detector as different wavelengths of light go through the tissue, hit that blood vessel that has the pulse wave that the sensor is trying to detect, and then predicting what the detector will see, and really helping to optimize the wavelengths of light in that emitter that will optimize the efficiency and the behavior of this optical sensor system. So just to summarize, we've got this Pythonic interface around our solvers that really helps to abstract the work that you're doing from having to get in and pull all the levers of the solver. So this should really, or has shown that it's really accelerating workflows, and it allows you to connect into the Python ecosystem and leverage other tools or other solvers that are also able to connect into that Python ecosystem. The second one is this idea that we now have this ecosystem that lets us scale from 5 to 10 models to thousands of virtual patients, and being able to streamline the generation of patient-specific geometries, take into account the variability in the material properties or characteristics that feed those simulations, being able to vary the boundary conditions that come in from the different types of patient activities and the severity of disease, account for the standards around the use of simulation, and to really create a smooth workflow that generates something that looks like what would be predicted in a clinical study. The other idea is that none of this can happen in isolation. So we've been looking at how to create a ecosystem for this. So working with regulatory partners and academic and clinical partners, how to develop this digital transformation, creating virtual organs, developing the ability to scale to clinical trials, looking at focused clinical applications, all the way to building these personal digital avatars. And again, it takes an ecosystem to do all this. So whether it's working with regulators, working with some of the industry leaders and startup companies, working with computational partners that give us the scalability for running large number of computational models, and across the network of academicians and hospitals as well, that when you enter into working with a company like Ansys, that all these parts of the ecosystem come into play and are available at your fingertips. So with that, I will wrap up and take any further questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Palmer, for all of your time today. I'm going to just toss something up on the screen quick, a few resources for everybody as we're talking through more questions. But one question that did come through was, what is your opinion of the role of company leadership in deploying and adopting simulation?
I'm going to ask for some clarification while I take a shot at answering my interpretation of that question. So company leadership, I don't know whether you mean the simulation company or the manufacturer, like a medical device company or a pharma company. But I actually think that we could follow the example from other industries in this one. So if we look at something like automotive and how modeling and simulation came to have a significant role there, it was really that the questions around safety and the regulations for safety couldn't be answered in any other way. So the industry ended up having to work towards developing the technologies that would allow them to be predictive. And I think that in the medical space, we haven't yet reached the point where those regulatory pressures have resulted in forcing modeling and simulation on the industry. But I think this is an opportunity for companies in a pre-competitive way to collaborate on how to do things that are in the best interest of the patient. So whether it's the manufacturer of devices, the manufacturer of pharmaceuticals, or the simulation technology companies, if we can figure out how to work together in a pre-competitive way to advance the methodologies, advance the technologies to make sure that they're positioned to answer the relevant questions. That's how I think that companies can work together for this.
Great. It sounds like that question was after or around manufacturers. So
Okay.
just getting buy-in from leadership to adopt simulation. So great. Another question, how frequent are these simulation models in current trials, and what are the projections for their use in 5 to 10 years? And a follow-up to that, are models patient-specific or specific to a certain demographic?
Excellent question. So I'm going to have to ask you to help me to remember each one in succession. So for the first part, the FDA did an internal study, I think about 3 years ago, where they looked at the PMA submissions. So these are submissions for new devices or new technologies coming onto that we're seeking approval, and they were reporting statistics about the increase in the use of modeling and simulation, I think over a 10 or 12-year time period. So I don't have those numbers off the top of my head on what the absolute numbers were, but it was trending upwards. And the numbers that I do have in my head were that the largest area was in cardiovascular modeling. So somewhere around the 90% of all those PMA submissions had to do with cardiovascular modeling. And I think some of that is influenced by the fact that for devices that are kind of frame-based, so stents or transcatheter valves or devices like that, a simulation is required. So that helps the regulators reviewing simulation to be comfortable with doing those reviews, and it also helps with the practitioners or the people submitting modeling and simulation to know that that's an open channel. So I think that's why the cardiovascular one is so huge, and then it kind of tails off for the other ones. And I think it's because people are still learning how to do those types of models, and the technology is developing in those spaces, and the different branches inside the regulatory authorities are learning how to manage those. What is not reflected in those statistics, though, is the 510K pathway, which has to do with products that are substantially equivalent to products that are already on the market. And this is that pathway dominates the orthopedic side of the world. There's a lot of orthopedic modeling and simulation that's been going on for decades. So I don't, that PMA number is not reflective of just the pervasiveness of modeling in orthopedics. I don't think I answered both parts of the question. What was the other part?
So that's great. The second part of the question was, are models patient-specific or specific to a certain demographic?
Yeah, so I think there's a transition away from the demographic modeling towards more patient-specific modeling. And I think that that's being driven by a number of factors. And most recently, it is being driven by the potential bias that may exist in averaging populations. So if we can have models that kind of reflect the demographic diversity, whether it's anthropomorphic or gender or race, having models that can capture those different things and understand the differences in how these different parts of the population may respond differently to a therapy is really driving it more towards the patient-specific modeling.
Wonderful. This last question kind of appeals to where you've been recently, and maybe a bit of a softball, but why did Medtronic choose to partner with Ansys?
So so key to the relationship between Ansys and Medtronic, I believe, was the ability to create these Lego blocks. And what do I mean by Lego blocks? I mean, rather than saying here's a heart model or here's a car, do all your work on this one. They did a lot of work to enable you to build whatever it is that you want. So there's a lot of work on like in the heart, how to use different types of electrophysiology models for how signals are propagated from one cell to another in the heart, and then a library of tissue constitutive models that you can choose from. So you can kind of build up whatever it is that you're doing a la carte, and that you as the end user have full control over those things and can explain how it was done to your leaders, to your internal regulatory body, to the external regulators as well. So I think that's what facilitated the relationship.
Wonderful. So that's all the questions we had. We have a few resources on the screen here. If you do want to get started with Ansys, we have experts at KETIV who can help out, who can make connections and be a solution provider. Dr. Palmer, thank you so much for your time and expertise today. This recording will be available all over the place, including KETIV.com, YouTube, and yeah, it'll be everywhere. So thank you again. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.